Senator Ted Cruz is with us because he's been about that in a variety of ways as of late. And Senator, welcome and thank you so much. How are you doing?
Mark, my friend, good morning.
Good morning to you. Listen, there are a lot of things that it seems like a kind of a downtime, a dead time, but it's a busy time. Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk ventilators. Let's talk about preparedness, and then we'll get into some private sector stuff, some pro-business stuff, and focusing on our way out of this. But how are we doing? I mean, everybody's focused on masks, ventilators, this and that. Take us on a tour through the things, the supply chains that you've been paying attention to.
Well, we are facing an unprecedented crisis. And in fact, we're facing two crises simultaneously. We're facing a public health crisis that is growing, that is dangerous, that is serious, and that we need to defeat. We are also facing an economic crisis. We're seeing economic devastation spread as a result of the policies government has put in place to defeat the public health crisis. Both of those are extracting an enormous and terrible toll. I think our priority needs to be defeating the public health crisis. All of the economic consequences are flowing from that public health crisis. And when we defeat that crisis, we can move back to the robust economic growth we had just a couple of months ago. I believe there are four priorities to defeating this pandemic. Number one, testing. It needs to be much more widespread. It needs to be more accurate. I've laid out specific steps to the administration we can take to move in that direction. Number two, protective gear. We need protective gear on the ground. Our first responders need it. Our healthcare workers need it to keep them safe. Number three, critical medical equipment, things like ICU beds, things like ventilators. We look over at a nation like Italy, where the crisis overwhelmed the socialist healthcare system they had there. There were simply too many people sick and dying for the capacity they had, and in particular, ventilators, the machines that help those with very serious respiratory illnesses breathe, they ran out of them. And so they had to make terrible triage decisions of deciding between one patient and another which patient lives and which patient dies. I don't want to see the United States healthcare system having to make that decision. So we need to be surging resources into building ventilators now. And it takes a little bit of time to build a ventilator. So if we're looking at crisis levels of very sick and dying in 2 to 3 weeks, we want to make sure we have all the ventilators we need so that we can provide life-saving medical care. And finally, fourth, we need to be accelerating medical research and development towards a vaccine, towards an effective treatment, and ultimately towards a cure for COVID-19. And I filed legislation to streamline the FDA approval process to move us quickly to curing and defeating this disease.
So those four, again, testing, protective gear, critical medical equipment like ICU beds and ventilators, and medical research and development for the path out of this. We all understand why there's an FDA, and if we're talking about shooting stuff into our veins and popping stuff into our mouth, I want to be extra cautious to make sure that the negatives don't outweigh the positives. We understand why it takes time for certain drugs to make their way to the market. Tell me your thoughts on the fast tracking. Obviously, everybody's all obsessed on the hydroxychloroquine story. And was that handled well? And is this, are we learning maybe one of the many 500 lessons of the shutdown that maybe we've been too careful and there's been a cost to that?
I think there is absolutely a cost to that. Look, conservatives should not be surprised to discover that government bureaucracy is slow and cumbersome. That is true with every government on the face of the planet. It's true with every large organization on the face of the planet. That is the nature of bureaucracy. When it comes to the FDA, there's a second component that has often been the case, and it's an idea that's called agency capture. And we see this across governments, again, across the world, where if an agency regulates a particular industry, that they will often become captured by that industry. In other words, their focus is on preserving and protecting the big market players. How does that play out in the pharmaceutical world? Well, right now, it is so difficult to get a new drug approved at the FDA or to get a new medical device approved that it can take years and it can take billions of dollars. That has a number of predictable consequences. It means the only players that can devote billions of dollars of R&D are the giant pharmaceutical companies. It makes it very hard for new entrants to compete in that space, number one. Number two, it focuses on where the R&D is directed, because if it's going to cost over $1 billion to get a new drug developed, you're not going to invest in areas where there's not the potential to make over $1 billion. What that means is we dramatically underinvest in rare diseases. Just in the United States, here is an amazing stat. There are 30 million Americans who suffer from a rare disease. Now, not all the same rare disease, obviously, then it wouldn't be rare, but different rare diseases. And the systemic problem we see is because the barriers, the cost to approval are so high, we don't get the research we need in how to cure and how to treat those rare diseases. I have for a long time championed legislation to reform how the FDA does its approval. It's called the results legislation. And what it says is it's structural change. It says if any pharmaceutical, if any medical device is approved in another major developed country in Europe, in Canada, and again, that the FDA has 30 days to approve it here. It doesn't make sense. It isn't right. Right now, there are people in the United States who have terrible diseases who can get treated abroad outside of this epidemic and crisis in normal times, can get treated abroad with medicines that are approved in Europe, and yet the U.S. makes it illegal to sell here. That doesn't make any sense. If you are sick, if you are dying, you have a right to try. You have a right to act to save your life. And so I do think one of the positive consequences of this crisis is that we are seeing some of these bureaucratic processes be streamlined, and I hope that principle will follow through, not just during the crisis, but going forward as well. Senator
Ted Cruz is here. I have come to understand and even embrace the $2 trillion that I know we didn't have, but we somehow magically find when times are urgent enough, and this certainly seems to meet that description. What's your thought about the methodology by which the checks are going to go out, and the people who get them, and the criteria and the means testing, the whole thing?
Well, look, you're absolutely right that spending $2 trillion is extraordinary and it's terrifying. I mean, that is about 10% of our national debt, which we spent in one day. And in ordinary times, that would not have happened. The reason it did is these are extraordinary times. This crisis, by the way, we were going to pay for this crisis regardless. The choice was simply, how do we address it?
Yep.
And I supported this. It passed the Senate unanimously, 96-0. Every single Republican, every single Democrat voted for it. Bernie Sanders voted for it. I voted for it, and everyone in between voted for it. And the reason is this crisis is profound from a public health perspective and from an economic perspective. Millions of small businesses are going out of business or on the verge of going out of business. Millions of people have been unemployed. This bill, I don't call this bill a stimulus bill.
No.
This bill was a relief bill.
It's not a bailout either. Bill. It's not a bailout. It's not a stimulus, because I don't even oppose either. This is a rescue. This is a flat-out rescue.
That's exactly right. And if you look at the different pieces of the bill, one of the most important you just referenced is the individual relief. Right now, every American in the country who makes less than $100,000 a year will be getting a check from the United States government. If you make $75,000 a year, each adult will get a check for $1,200, and for each child, you'll get a check of $500. That means a couple that has 3 kids and that is making less than $150,000 a year as a couple will receive $3,900, $3,900. That is real money, and that is designed to be there for people who are hurting, who may have lost their job, who may be scared. How am I going to make the rent check next week? How am I going to buy groceries for my kids? How am I going to pay for my daughter's orthodontist bill? This is emergency relief direct to people who are hurting. You asked, how is it going out? The Treasury Department is distributing it. They have projected it will take 2 to 3 weeks to arrive. If the IRS has your bank information, if you normally get your refund through a direct deposit, the IRS has projected that those direct deposits will be faster. They may be as soon as April 8th. That's what the general counsel of the IRS told me, is they are trying to target those direct deposits by April 8th. If they don't have your bank information, if they're sending a physical check, printing those checks and getting them out will take longer. But what Congress specified is make it as fast as humanly possible.
A couple of more minutes.
Those are on the way.
A couple of more minutes with Senator Ted Cruz. I like affordable prices at the gas pumps as much as the next person, but the oil industry is taking it on the chin, and the Saudis are not helping. Did you and some other senators get into a conference call with the Saudi ambassador about this? What are they doing, and what should we know about it?
So the Saudis are doing enormous damage to us. I joined with 12 other senators. We sent a letter to the Saudi ambassador, and then we had a phone call with her that was as candid and bare knuckles as any conversation I've ever had with a foreign leader, where we said, listen, Saudi Arabia is screwing the United States and it's screwing Texas, that we're in the middle of a health crisis, a pandemic, and at the same time the Saudis are flooding the market with oil, trying to drive down the prices and trying to bankrupt Texas shale producers. They're trying to put the Texas oil and gas industry out of business, and that is nothing short of economic warfare. I and the other senators made clear that if they're going to behave like our enemies, they should expect to be treated like our enemies, and they need to stop trying to just be opportunistic thieves attacking America at a time of crisis. I can tell you that message was heard. I think it was heard loudly. I pointed out the 13 of us are consistently the strongest defenders of energy and oil and gas in the Senate, but also have historically been the strongest allies to the Saudis. And the Saudi defense is, well, Russia's doing it. And my response to the ambassador, I said, look, Russia's our enemy. We understand that. They behave like our enemy, and they're treated like our enemy. You're supposed to be our friend. There's no state in the union that does more business with Saudi Arabia than Texas, and you are not behaving like a friend, and you sure seem to want our help when it comes to a military conflict or anything else. Well, you need to decide, are you with us or are you against us? I hope they make the right decision on that.
Last thing with Senator Ted Cruz, I so look forward to getting back. I mean, normal life will mean we can go get street tacos and a margarita. Normal life will mean we can take our kids to various places. And normal life will mean we'll settle down to what's looking like a Trump versus Biden election on November 3rd. And when we're talking about that, we'll know that life is kind of back to normal. The Democrats right now, with a convention in the middle of July, are talking about maybe not having that. Republican convention isn't until August, like last week of August. I want the Democrats to have their convention because it means we're back to normal sooner. I can't wait for the show material that a Democrat convention will give me. But let's talk a little bit about the weirdness of the entire campaign. Trump's on TV every day. Joe Biden has vanished from the planet. I understand that. The weirdness of this political year under these circumstances.
Well, this is the equivalent to being in a wartime. Much like in wartime, this has become the dominant issue, how we defeat this public health crisis, how we defeat this economic crisis. And it's not complicated that that's going to play the decisive factor in the election, that this is impacting everyone's life. But let me give you a moment of hope and optimism. You're saying getting back to normal. Mm-hmm. Despite all the devastation, there is an enormous silver lining to this crisis, which is it is forcing all of us to be at home, to be with our families. I'm at home. I'm working from home every day. Heidi's working from home every day. Both of our girls are doing school distance learning from home every day. We're having every day we have lunch together, all four of us. Every night we have dinner together, all four of us. In the evenings, there's nothing you can do, so we've started making it a pattern of going on a family walk every evening right around dusk. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, walking out in the neighborhood, everybody is walking in the neighborhood. Now, everyone's staying 6 feet apart. There's social distancing, so you cross on opposite sides of the street. Mm-hmm. But it's like Mayberry. I've never seen my neighborhood like this.
There you go.
It's wonderful that you take your dogs out and you're happy and you're in the sunshine. And if you can't go out, you can't go to a movie, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't do anything except spend time with your families. Right. And I will say that opportunity is truly a gift from God. In the midst of all of this suffering, in the midst of all of this misery, the opportunity every day to be with our families. we will be grateful for that forever.
How many, since you are so busy, you and Heidi and your family is so busy, how many people in your neighborhood did not in fact know you lived there? How many times you went, oh my God, it's Ted Cruz?
It's interesting, actually. A lot of folks, our neighborhood, we know each other pretty well. And there are a lot of kids on our street, and we walk around. But, it's the entire neighborhood is out walking, all separated by distance. But it is a wonderful, it's like being, we live in central Houston. It's like being transported to a small town 75 years ago.
It's great.
It's wonderful.
It's so great to focus on the silver linings, because when we return to normalcy, I hope we're a more grateful nation. I hope our priorities are reordered. We rediscover family and discover or rediscover God. We can talk about ventilators and protective gear all day, and we should, but we also need the Lord himself through this. And just listen, and these briefings are heavy with policy from the White House every day. I think each one is a masterpiece, a big sloppy masterpiece, just like this entire presidency. Did you catch what happened to Mike Lindell when he dared to speak these words after he talked about, we're going to be cranking out masks at MyPillow, doing our country a great favor, and oh, by the way, maybe let's rediscover our families and rediscover the Bible, and he got torched for it.
Well, I got to say, I think in some ways it may just have been a brilliant move because it so triggered the mainstream media.
Yep.
To see someone who loves America and will talk about the God and Bible and the Bible in a positive way and the president in a positive way, the media all went into fits. And maybe it was just a brilliant ploy, because none of those media reporters or executives are going to sleep well tonight. and so that means maybe they're so upset they're going to go buy a new pillow, so it may work out at the end.
Exactly. Our promo code Mike G for my buddy Mike Gallagher. Listen, best to Heidi and Caroline and Catherine. Enjoy those walks, and I hope the day comes really soon when you're doing it because you want to and not because it's the only thing you have the option of doing. But thank you for the leadership and being with us. I know we'll be talking soon.
Well, thank you, Mark, and we will make it through this together. America is strong, Texas is strong, and we're going to come through this.
Senator Ted Cruz, 827, Mark Davis, 660 AMEN.